Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the 12th chapter in Paul's second epistle to the Corinthians. And before we read and comment on that, we just want to briefly review the 11th chapter and connect it to the first word we read of in the first verse in the chapter we'll be covering today. Second word, rather, boast, but that really ties into what we want to communicate. So, Corinth, the church that Paul had personally founded and evangelized, was what I like to call a problem church. They had no shortage of problems, but the one he's kind of addressing here is boasting. So they were a spiritually gifted yet prideful people, and they did not have the mind of the collective. So there was a lot of selfishness in the tongues and the prophesying. They had no shortage of gifts, but they weren't using them with the collective in mind. And so sort of after Paul left, these outsiders came in, and he identifies them as emissaries of the adversary who had came in, and these men were all about boasting. You know, they took money for their trade. That's something Paul never did. And then he really lays into the boasting, which comes after in the 16th verse, where it reads, "Again I say, let no one think me a fool, and if otherwise, at least receive me as a fool, for me to also boast a little." So by the connection of those words, he regards boasting as a foolish thing, and these people had a problem of boasting, these false apostles and these super apostles, angels masquerading as servants of light, but they were literally emissaries of the adversary. Paul did not mess around with who they were or what they were. He knew what they were all about and who they came from and who sent them. He also knew where he came from. So he boasts. The next word is verse 17, "What I speak not according to the master, but as in foolishness, in this boldness of boasting. Since many boast according to the flesh, I too shall boast." So the fool in him, he doesn't claim this. This isn't directly attributed to the master, from whom he's seen many revelations, but he had the revelation himself, born of personal experience. And so he proceeds to lay down a laundry list of the sufferings he had endured for the spread of the good news, for their sakes and on their behalfs, and this was his claim for authority. So Paul's authority was always being challenged and undermined in his absence, at least in this church, whenever he departed. So he wrote he revisited Corinth and kind of settled the affairs, much of what we read of the son who was engaged in sexual relations with his mother that we read of in the first book had been restored and had repented. So that's a beautiful example of forgiveness, but problems still crept in. So he's still addressing many of them. And so the opening verse reads, "To boast indeed is useless for me, for I shall go on to visions and revelations of Yahweh." So he's not a boastful man. He does not trust in boasting. He does not engage in boasting. He does not indulge in boasting, except very reluctantly to meet them on their own terms. So he's not a boaster by nature. He considers it useless and worthless for the mission that he's on. But he could easily boast of visions and revelation. These are something that none of them could boast of. This is a more extreme example of divine revelation than the gifts of tongue or prophesying. Vision is to literally behold visibly divinity in sight, so to have a visual reflection of their presence. "I know a man in Messiah who 14 years ago, whether in the body I do not know, or whether out of the body I do not know, Elohim knows. Such a one was caught up to the third heavens." So Paul is in all likelihood speaking of himself. He doesn't want to boast too much, but the way the Greek original is alternately arranged and translated, it is a self-reference. So 14 years ago, he wrote this in 57 AD. That takes us all the way to 43 AD, when this body, now he didn't know if he was in his body or what he was, or if he was out of it. He has little understanding and vague recollection, and the vision he describes is beyond description. So what does he do? He boasts in his weakness, and that's what forms the verse we'll eventually get to, the 10th verse. And the third heaven would have been the heaven beyond the sky and atmosphere. So that speaks of divine presence. So he had intimate access and exposure and experience in the divine presence. Whether he was in his body or out of it, he can't remember. He couldn't tell you, but he does know that God knows. And so he's transferring the authority of the one whom he had visited on himself. And I know such a man, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. Elohim knows. So he kind of repeats the same thing. He knows such a man. He's probably referring to himself. So he's artfully avoiding a boast through linguistics. And once more, he qualifies he didn't remember if he was in his body, or this person, as he words it, was in his body, or if he was out of the body experience. He doesn't know. Elohim knows. He was there. He made it all happen. Paul wasn't expecting this experience in all likelihood. So this is a vision and a trance, which is an offshoot of the vision category of personal special revelation. That he caught up into paradise and heard unspeakable words, which it is not right for a man to speak. So paradise would have been the heaven, and the closest thing, the author who perhaps writes on this more extensively than Paul would be John in the book of Revelation, where he has no words to describe the visions he beholds. So what does he do? He always prefaces the adjective or the noun that he uses with like or an as, because what he says is what he sees is literally beyond description. There's no earthly thing like it, so he just does what the best he can. And Paul doesn't even try in this. He says, I saw it, it was good enough for me. What I speak I cannot share, but I saw it, I was there, and I'm not going to tell any of you about it because I can't even communicate the experience. I don't fully understand it, but what I do understand is that I could boast in this, but I choose not to. It's only incidental. He's building up to the dramatic crescendo where his ultimate boast is in his weakness. Of such a one I shall boast, but of myself I shall not boast, except in my weaknesses. So he's so subtle with the words that one often forgets that he just was referring to himself silently, depending on how one translates or arranges the Greek original. But of himself he shall not boast. So in this translation, we gather that he's referencing himself via proxy, but he's not boasting of himself except in his weakness. And that is the paradox, because it's not human nature to boast in our weakness, in our vulnerabilities, in our shortcomings, vices, and deficiencies. But Paul had cause to rejoice in his weaknesses, of which he elaborates on more fully, and we will too as we read it. For if I shall want to boast, I shall not be a fool, for I shall speak the truth, but I refrain, lest anyone should think more of me than what he sees in me or hears of me. So he considers once more boasting foolish, and he kind of does it so artfully. He's almost not technically boasting, but he really is. But his message is truth. He's not a boasting. He's not a self-exalter. He is the depository of divine revelation. His message is never about Paul, and a lot of his enemies thought it was. They had a different mindset. They were looking at his place on the podium and place on the platform, kind of persuading people, and they said, I could do this too. But, their mind wasn't motivated by truth, nor their message reflective of it. Paul lived for the truth, he spoke the truth, and he died for the truth. And he's content to leave people with their gathered impressions of him. That's how we personally translate. Everyone think more of me than what he sees in me or hears of me. So in other words, don't settle for the secondhand gossip, the slander campaign that I'm contending with all the time, because I'm here and I'm writing to you, so take what I give you and leave your own impression based on who I am, what I say, and what I do, and not on what others are saying to you. Because remember, Paul's writing via epistle, so he is no way, he's not going to make it back in all likelihood throughout his life to correct and redress some of these issues. and to keep me from exalting myself because of the exceeding greatness of the revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, an angel of Satan to hit me, to keep me from exalting myself. So the great paradox of the perfect paradox is that Satan, the proudest of human beings, when Lucifer fell, it was from the sin of pride, was used as an instrument of the Almighty to humble his servant Paul. So a lot of tragedies and setbacks and pains and struggles we deal with in our life, we think they're accidents, we think they're coincidences, but they might be God speaking to us. So the same thing happened to Job. It was by his sovereign permission that he gave the adversary a virtually blank check to do all that he could do to ruin Job's life without taking it. So it's always the sovereign extent of permission. Satan is a tool and an instrument in the divine design, which he was foreknown even before it became an unfolding reality. He is an eternal being. Satan is a created being. And the reason that he was, he could have boasted because he had seen this magnificent and unspeakable, undescribable, unprecedented, and unduplicated vision of the third tier of heaven. That's the presence of divinity itself. And this could have caused him, so he's qualifying here, because of the exceeding greatness of the revelation, so keep me from exalting myself. So he applies personally to the revelation. He definitively identifies it as being his own, the one he referred to via proxy in the earlier passage we read. 8th verse, concerning this, I pleaded with the master 3 times to take it away from me. That's not an unrighteous request. He had no way of knowing. He knew that it was Satan had sent him. Now this thorn, no one knows quite what it is, but we do gather that it was a debilitating physical ailment that prevented him from performing to the best of his ability, probably made it harder to travel, and just had this constant nagging pain, yet he endured the road all the way and beyond to the end. And so, but he's asking to have him take it away. That's a natural response that even the unpraying unbeliever will do. They'll pray the foxhole atheist as soon as their knee hits a stub in the car, and their knees in pain. They're going to pray to someone just to take it all away. It's a natural response, but the answer that Yahweh gives Paul is not the one he was expecting, but he resigns himself to settle for it. And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, and my power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, then, I shall boast in my weaknesses, so that the power of Messiah rest on me. So the first phrase, which is a quote, my grace and my power is perfected in weakness, that is Yahweh's answer to him. Then we read of Paul's answer to the response of his answer, which is, so he, having been proven and told that his grace is sufficient to make him finish the journey with the pain in his course onto him, then he embraces it wholeheartedly and unreservedly and without abandon. And he, having been sent the signal of approval of Yahweh on suffering, he begins to boast in it because he is a man with a close connection and an intimate relation with the one whom he conversed with in personal revelation. So he has a direct answer from Elohim, and how many of us can honestly say that we could record the same? I know I can't, but that's not going to stop me from praying or anything. But the knowledge that the power of Messiah rests on him, so the Son sustains him and heals him. His atonement has a healing effect, which extends unto Paul, and he takes full advantage of it. Therefore I take pleasure in weaknesses, in insults, in needs, in persecutions, in distresses, for the sake of Messiah. For when I am weak, then I am strong. So taking pleasure in weaknesses and being insulted and just beaten up, persecuted in every way, shape, and form, and just being distressed all the time, is not something we take pleasure in ourselves, at least in the natural man in the ordinary world, but that is something that we could, and should embrace with the mindset of Paul, because when we do it, we know we're doing it for the sake of Messiah. It's for a cause and a person and a design beyond ourselves, so that makes it all worth it. And when I am weak, then I am strong. That is a paradox being by definition a statement uniting two or more ostensibly irreconcilable polarities in a coherent whole. So the contrast is between weak and strong, but becoming strong in your weakness is where the paradox goes. That's where it must be explained. So Satan trembles when he sees the weakest Christian on his knees, to appropriate a jingle. So the reason we become strong when we are weak is because when we are weak, when we are aware of the fact that in and of ourselves we do not have the ingredients in ourselves to take it through all the way home, then we will lean on his superior strength, which is all sufficient for the task and beyond. And that's all the time. We're going to wrap it up early today. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Take care until then. Bye-bye.